Hi guys, I'm Medicine Mary and welcome back to my channel. Today I have my October wrap up. So in the month of October, I actually did a really fun 72-hour readathon by myself. And in that readathon, I read 4 mangas, but I don't include the mangas in like my overall stats just because that's just not something that I personally do. But I did want to let you guys know quickly what those mangas were. So the first one is Everyone's Getting Married by Izumi Miyazono, Happy Marriage by Maki and Joji, An Incurable Case of Love by Maki and Joji, and I was sent this one by Viz Media. And the last one was Stepping on Roses by Rinko Ueda. Out of all these, I recommend them all except for this one. This one was not good. Do not get this one. So in the month of October, I read a total of 7 books. Those were all physical books. I read 1 middle grade, 4 YA, and 2 adults. 5 of those were fantasy and 2 of them were mystery crime. The total page count for this month was 2,715 pages. As per normal, I'm going to start with my lowest rated read and work up to my highest rated read. I did have 2 5 stars this month and they were beautiful. So without further ado, let us get into the books. The first 3 out of 5 star book is Bad Debts by Peter Temple. So this is one of the books that I read for my cultural literacy class that I'm taking this semester. It is about this guy named Jack Irish, and he is a reformed alcoholic. He was a lawyer but is no longer one and is kind of more of like a PI at the moment. And he gets a call from one of his old clients. When he got this phone call and answered the voicemail, he was like, I don't really remember who this bloke is, and just ignores it. The dude then turns up dead, and so Jack feels really guilty about this and decides to then actually look into his murder, and in the end he ends up fighting this huge government conspiracy. So that's what this is about. I really enjoyed it. This is Australian, it is set in Melbourne, which I freaking loved. What prevented me from giving it a 4 star is the fact that there's a part in this book, and this is like a whole series, I think it's like a 4 or 5 book series, and the issue is that there is a portion of this where Jack is part of this kind of horse betting ring, and he, you know, him and his 2 friends, like, they go out, they find the horses, they do research and all this kind of stuff, and that part of it, the jargon went over my head. Like, even though I grew up around that kind of stuff, around like the Melbourne horse races, did not understand anything that was going on, and those portions of the book just were like, you didn't really need them in the book, but it probably is going to be more pertinent as the books go on. So I was just like, 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I gave 3 out of 5 stars, I don't own anymore because I passed on the Arc, but I read an Arc of Grave Maidens by Coon. This book had a lot of potential, and I personally think that the first half was a lot better than the second half, and that this book would have done better if it was a standalone fantasy. The King of Alu falls deathly ill, and when the kings of this land fall ill, in their death, they have 3 grave maidens that come with them into their temple, and they all die together. And the idea is that it's very prestigious because the grave maidens will follow him into the afterlife. What happens is when the king falls ill and the grave maidens are announced, Kamani's younger sister Renee is actually announced as one of the Grave Maidens, and Kamani is distraught from this because Renee is basically about to just be sacrificed. Even though Renee doesn't see it that way, she sees it as this massive, you know, amazing, gratuitous thing that's about to happen to her. So Kamani takes it upon herself to infiltrate the palace and try to heal the king. I really liked the idea of the magic system in this. It was more natural magic, like in the way of healing, and in the idea of there are these gods, these like deities that this kingdom believes in, and that's the reason why the king has these grave maidens. And I did really enjoy the language in this. I enjoyed the way that it was just crafted. My biggest issue was the sibling relationship. Kamani and Renee have an awful sibling relationship as sisters. They are constantly fighting and they're constantly bickering with each other, and normally like that's okay in some books, but the way that it was just portrayed in this book was constantly really frustrating me and making me so angry at both of the characters. Renee was always very childish and Kamani was just not understanding, and there was just so much miscommunication between the 2 of them. And honestly, like, our main character, Kamani, she wasn't that great of a person. She was just so stubborn and so self-centered, And you understood why, because she's lost so much in her life that she really wants to hold on to Renee. The way that she just goes about it is just very... I just didn't like it. And so if the main character is not likable, I have a very difficult time getting into a book because I am such a character-driven person when it comes to reading. That was honestly my biggest issue. And then there was the fact that around the 80% mark, she just makes the stupidest decisions. And I just sat there and I was like, bruh, you are clearly being manipulated. How can you, like, she was being revered as this really smart person and she makes such dumb choices. And you just sit there and you're like, really? I will say that there is also a romance in this, and the love interest, the poor guy, is just like stepped all over by Kamani. And I'm just like, oh, okay. Like, the guy that's interested in her, he is quite affluent in the community, and Kamani, ever since her like family was cast out, they have very little money. She barely has like enough money to even go out and get them all food. So this dude, he's like, hey, why don't I buy you dinner? And she's like,
no, don't pity me. How dare you? Like, I can do this all on my own.
And I'm like, girl, y'all are literally starving. Like, get off your high horse for a second and just be grateful that this guy who's interested in you is just wanting to take you out to dinner. Like, he has no ulterior motives. He's not trying to take pity on you. He's just trying to be nice. And you're being a complete and utter witch to him, okay? I'm just gonna say it. So, I still want to pick up the second book because I want to know how this thing ends. But, yeah, that's my rant over. The next 2 out of 5-star book I read was Her Crown of Fire by Renee April. So we follow Rose Evermore, and her and her best friend Tyson are in their senior year. But Rose starts to have these premonitions and these visions all of a sudden, and she also finds herself to be very attracted to fire and wanting to, like, you know, play with matches and flames, and she sees that she actually doesn't get burnt when she puts her hand in a flame, and all these weird things start happening to her. And then one day she just has this premonition of going into this river, and she's like, you know what? I'm gonna follow this vision. Let's see what happens. So she goes up to this river and goes to fall into it, like, you know, off a bridge. And her best friend Tyson sees her and is like, Rose, what you doing? And grabs her. So they both fall into the river. And when they emerge from the river afterwards, they're in a completely different world. They're in like a medieval magical world, if that makes sense. They are called human born, like when they come from the human world into this world, and she is actually a human born mage. The issue is that Tyson is just human born, and the fact that he crossed over is very deadly to him, and he could actually be killed. So Tyson's staying in hiding while Rose goes off to the academy and tries to train to become a fire mage. Everyone has like different affinities. However, Rose starts trying to look for a way to bring Tyson home because he is in danger, and she makes these other friends along the way, and that's kind of like the main bulk of the story. It reminds me a lot of the book Trial by Fire by Josephine Angelini, but better. I prefer this a lot more because I found the characters a lot more fleshed out. We have a very, very major character death around the 50% mark, and it was as soon as that happened, I found myself completely drawn to the book because I felt this character's death. For the rest of the book, you notice that this character is not there because they've been so present. They became a part of everything, and them not being there was such an obvious thing. So you really understood Rose's like sorrow and the way that she was feeling, and the way that she kind of just, she was so broken by this death that it then affected her way throughout the rest of the novel. And also when this character does die, Rose ends up getting a leg injury. This is like not spoilery, I think. But her leg injury means that she now has to use a cane. So we do have chronic pain representation and kind of a leg disability. Like she can know, like her leg's never going to repair because a chunk of it was gone. And even though there are healers, they can't bring back what has died. And so that's a whole representation thing that we also see that I really appreciated. I will also say that Rose studies rune magic, and I have not seen rune magic done in quite a long time other than the Mortal Instruments series, and it's done a lot differently in this book, and I really loved it. I also loved how the magic system, as the story went on, got more and more complex, but it was never confusing. Like, I always understood how the magic worked in this world, and that's a very big thing, especially for a debut novel. That's very impressive to me. The issue was that the writing in this book, you can tell that it's a debut book. So there are moments where it's kind of cringeworthy or there are things that happen and you read it and you're like, oh, okay. You know, Rose and Tyson came from the human world and now they're in this medieval world. They use a lot of slang from nowadays, and whenever they use those slang words, it very much takes you out of the story and you're kind of just like, it's very jarring when it happens. And I understand it because, you know, they did come in from somewhere else, but I just didn't really like that. So that's why it's a 3 out of 5 stars. So the next book, we're into my 4 out of 5 star reads now. I'm really excited because this was actually a school book, like one of the books I read for school, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, which is really awesome. And that is The Lost Ones by Sheena Kamel. So it's about this woman named Nora, and 15 years ago she was brutally drugged, raped, and beaten into a coma. And while she was in this coma, she was pregnant, so she ended up being 4 months pregnant by the time she awoke from the coma, and by that point she couldn't get an abortion. So she had to actually have the baby, and then she gave the baby up for adoption. And then she became an alcoholic and is currently in recovery. She's like 2 years sober, I think, by the time this book takes place. So in present day, the baby that she gave birth to is 15, and she gets a phone call from the adoptive parents who really shouldn't be reaching out to her. And the adoptive parents say that her biological daughter, Bonnie, has gone missing. And they think that she's been kidnapped or something horrible has gone wrong. They reach out to Nora, not knowing that Nora is actually currently a PI. So Nora is kind of riddled with a little bit of guilt and is also kind of upset at the parents because she's like, I gave up the baby for adoption to have a better life and you guys have done screwed up. So she's kind of pissed at them, but is also guilty because it is still her biological daughter. So she does look into it. And while she looks into it, she starts getting these other threats and things. She uncovers like this larger plot at play, and it's really interesting to see how this all goes. I really loved this, and it's very brutal. It's very gory, and it has a lot of triggers in it, but I loved it. I loved how it ended. It has a bit of a saddish ending, but I just love the way that this story was written. It was just really cool, especially as like a crime story. And sure, there were times where you're like, Nora, maybe you shouldn't do that, but she still does it anyway because she gives 0 Fs because her life kind of sucks at the moment. She lives in the basement of the place that she works in. If you like crime stories, I think that you should maybe have a look at this, like read the blurb, see if it sounds like something you'd like. It's a really short and quick read, and yeah. So now we have a book that's 4.5 stars. Could it have been 5 stars? Yes. But I actually forget now why I didn't give it 5 stars. Anyway, that book is The Beautiful by Renee Adieh. Oh my god, that's so shiny. This book follows Celine in 1872 New Orleans, and she's just moved there from Paris because something horrible happened, and so she's running away from it. Now, what ends up happening is there's these brutal murders that begin happening around the day that she arrives. Bodies start turning up closer and closer to Celine. One of the girls from the convent ends up getting murdered, and Celine starts to kind of get curious as to what's happening. I know a lot of people don't like how much talk there is about the society and 1872 New Orleans and what people are wearing. There's a lot of talk about society and the garments and the role of women and this idea of kind of feminism that's going on in this time period. And I personally really enjoyed it. A lot of our characters are biracial. Celine herself is half Asian, but I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And I just loved the way that this world was built. Renee Adieh has such a way with words, and she crafted such a beautiful world. And I know that the vampires in this aren't too prominent. It's very minimal. The vampires are kind of sprinkled throughout, and then they become more and more prominent towards the end of the book. I'd say the last quarter has the most vampirism in it. I will say that I was kind of shocked by the reveal as to who the murderer was. I really didn't see it coming, but I still really enjoyed it. There is a love triangle in this, and the next book is definitely, oh, you know what, I remember now why I gave it a 4.5 stars. I remember. It's because this book ends with one of my least favorite tropes. It is a way to kind of fix a plot or like kind of move the plot along, but it's a trope that I really dislike. I'm not going to say what that trope is because it'll really spoil the book, but that's the main reason why it couldn't be a full 5 stars, is because I really dislike that trope. The reason why it was a 4.5 stars instead of a 4-star book is because one of our characters, one of the legs of the triangle is Michael, and he is half Italian. And so there's one point where we get to meet his cousin and his nonna, and it was the part where we got to meet his nonna that I actually cried. Like, I had to put the book down and I was crying because the representation of Italian heritage, of what a nonna is like, and it made me cry because it made me think of my own Italian heritage and of my own nonna who passed away 4 years ago. And because of that, I had to give it a full half star, because when I have an emotional connection to a book, it instantly has to, it's just going to be above a 4 star. It's just a given because I have a connection to the story. So overall, I really enjoy this. I think that if you enjoy books that are period, like set in the, I adore books set in the 1800s. And so if you like that too and you like fantasy books, I think that you'd actually really enjoy this because the period aspect of this book is very prominent. So you have to be open to that. And if you are, you'll like this book. The next book, which was a, without a doubt, 5 out of 5 star read, is Percy Jackson and the Last Olympian. Finished it. Oh, okay. So there are 5 books in the Percy Jackson series and I've been reading them for the last 5 months with Soleil from the Little Readers Corner, and Percy Jackson is my favourite middle grade series, hands down. I was never a Harry Potter kid growing up. I was a Percy Jackson kid, and finishing this series out just meant so much to me. I just love Percy Jackson so much, and this was one of the most, it's just such an amazing conclusion to the series. Like, it just fits all the characters as a whole and all the decisions that they end up making. This book is very action-packed. The action starts from the very beginning and it continues throughout the entire book. There's so much that goes on. I tabbed so much in this too. Like, look at those tabs. Like, it was crazy. Oh, this was such a great final book. 5 out of 5 stars, no doubt. The last book that I read in October that was a 5 out of 5 star read was Girls of Storm and Shadow by Natasha Ngan. I still don't own a final copy of this yet. This book did just come out, I think on the 5th of November, but my edition is going to be the Fairy Loot edition, so I'm waiting for that to come from the UK. But I did get to read this in October before it came out, and I love this book. So this is the second book in the Girls of Paper and Fire series, which follows ḻeigh, who in this world there are 3 castes, and there is the Moon case, which are all demons, and then there's the Steel case, which is half demon, half human, and then there is the Paper case, which is just all humans. And in the beginning of Girls of Paper and Fire, ḻeigh is recruited because of her golden eyes to be a paper girl, and this is basically a concubine to the Demon King. ḻeigh is fighting back against this system that has been created, and she doesn't want to be stuck as a paper girl. She doesn't want to be a concubine to the king. And it's this whole rebellion storyline. And then this second book, we really get into the rebellion and learning who the rebels are and their story. But we also see the leftovers that have come from ḻeigh and the other concubine, how they're still affected by this huge PTSD from their sexual assault. And I think that that was just so beautifully crafted, and I really connected to it because I really appreciate the fact that Natasha Ngan went through the effort of showing that ḻeigh and her significant other both had such different responses to their PTSD, to the sexual assault. They both dealt with it very differently, and I really appreciated seeing that and seeing how they kind of lent on each other, but how it also created a rift between one another. And like, this book just pulled at so many heartstrings. We do have once again, we have a major character death that we haven't, like, in this book, and that was just really sad to me. And you see how it just affects all these characters. Like, Natasha Ngan has such a beautiful way of writing, and I remember when I first started this book, I was just in awe. I was like, I forgot how amazing she is at writing. The way that she weaves her words and her sentences is just so amazing that you cannot help but just love this world. I know a lot of people are kind of struggling with it, but I gave Girls of Paper and Fire a 4 out of 5 stars, and I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars, so I guess it just depends on who you are as a person as to what you like. But this was definitely something that I really appreciated. I like seeing more of the world, because in the first book you were kind of just stuck in the hidden palace. In this book you get to see more of everything else and what's going on. I do understand, like, I was very frustrated by how ḻeigh and her significant other had these, they were fighting a lot in this book, and there were a lot of things that were very frustrating to me, and there's always a lack of communication that does occur in this book, and I can see if that would frustrate a lot of people, but I was able to get over that because I loved so much more, and there were just so many beautifully quotable moments in this. And seeing ḻeigh kind of realize, okay, yes, the Demon King is awful, and I was for the rebellion, but is the rebellion all that good? Like, and I feel like it's this idea of how far can a rebellion go to go against the kingdom without becoming as bad as the kingdom. But yeah, okay, that's all I'm gonna say for now. If you guys did enjoy this video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more of me, please subscribe to my channel, and until next time, thanks a bunch guys. Bye!